Dwarfs and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer on the other side of the camera. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Christopher. Ladies and gentlemen, this podcast is called No Dwarfs. Big old question mark on the end of that. And we do have a dumbest bill in America, which goes to millennials and where we are today in society as it relates to how we speak to people and how we address them. Pretty amazing dumbest bill, and it's hard to believe a legislature actually did this. But first up, ladies and gentlemen, no dwarfs allowed on this podcast. No, we gladly would allow dwarfs on this podcast. And I believe there was a time when they were called midgets, then they were called dwarfs, and then the request was little people. By the way, I'm not necessarily sure this is what they wanted, the dwarfs, but it's like the political correct class and the political correct writers and so forth. But one thing's for sure, they do exist and they do need to work just like everyone else. And we're calling this podcast No Dwarfs because, believe it or not, one of the most iconic movies of all time, right? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, one of the most iconic movies of all time, decided to do a remake by Disney, the wonderful woke world of Disney. And Disney decided to do what? Disney decided that there weren't going to be any dwarfs. Why? Well, we have a quick article to read, and I want to know your opinion about this. Disney cues up its next woke stinker of a movie as their stock price plummets. People are making these jokes about ours being the PC Snow White. Yeah, it is, because it is indeed just that. So the struggling Walt Disney Company, by the way, it's struggling, ladies and gentlemen, because Walt Disney, as you recall, the company itself, decided to take on the entire state government of Florida and to take on Governor DeSantis of Florida. They did so by trying to inculcate grooming aspects into their movies and theme park. And it was quite clear. I mean, there's no other way to explain it. Remember, the most innocent of innocent children go to the Walt Disney Company theme parks and or watch their movies because they want to be entertained and they want to celebrate, as do the parents, the innocence of childhood. And the Walt Disney Company, of course, a couple of years ago decided that, well, more than a couple of years ago when they actually decided to get involved into the grooming business, but they decided they were going to be all in on not just woke ideology, but actually inculcating LGBTQ plus and in particular transgender nonsense into children's movies, okay? They want to do that to adult movies, so be it. You can choose to watch it as an adult or not choose, but children and parents in particular, many of them, they don't pay attention to what their kids are watching, and the children certainly don't know any better. So they turn on the Walt Disney Channel. Next thing you know, they're watching this nonsense. And then Disney started putting this stuff into their parks as well as their movies, because obviously it all feeds into each other. The parks feed the movies feed the parks. And DeSantis was going to have none of it and got rid of their tax exempt status in the state of Florida. And more importantly than the tax exempt status, I mean, Disney did pay taxes, so I should clarify that. Specifically, DeSantis got rid of Disney's ability to govern themselves. So, Disney had the opportunity for many, many years since its founding in Florida. Obviously, it started in California, but since the park was founded in Florida, they had their own government, and they ran their own government for themselves, by themselves, and DeSantis said no more of that. So that's the background of this. And the Walt Disney Company, ladies and gentlemen, still hasn't learned. Their stock is down while the stock market has been increasing. And at the same time, their movies are just not doing well at all. And remember, there are a lot of different ways to release movies now. It's just not just in the movie theaters, but it's also through streaming. Disney, of course, has its own streaming channel. It's very, very popular. I think it's the most popular or one of the most popular streaming services on the planet. Yet, they're having difficulty getting people to buy into their nonsensical movies. And the latest is, guess what? Snow White, but without the seven dwarfs. So, the famous German princess Snow White, whose skin is famously as white as snow, thus her name Snow White, right, will be played by the Hispanic Rachel Ziegler. This is the remake of Snow White. Further, the seven dwarfs will be played by a diverse cast, diverse, of course, cast of full-grown adults, including 3 black dwarfs, one of whom appears to be a woman. So it's not Snow White, it's Hispanic Snow White or Snow Hispanic. I'm not really sure. And it shouldn't matter, by the way, in terms of like Snow White can be anyone you want. But here's the problem Disney has, and this is kind of funny. And you have to admit out there in podcast land, this is kind of funny. If you're Disney and you're full-blown woke, right? You know what you can't do, Chris? You can't make Snow White actually black. Because if you do, then it's no longer Snow White, it's Snow Black. And snow is actually white. When it comes from the sky and it falls on the ground, it's white, right? And so the movie was always called Snow White. And I feel pretty confident that way back in the day, many decades ago, when Disney made Snow White, it was not about being racist. Okay, it wasn't. It was about just being pure creative, because Snow White, part of it was that Snow White was so innocent and so friendly and so nice and so kind. We all know this. But of course, fast forward, Disney, of course, is self-flogging. You know, they're just like flogging themselves all day long. No, we're going to have we can't have a white Snow White. And I'm sure, can you see them in the boardroom now talking about this, about how they're going to cast it? I have an idea. You know, I know a really great actress, and the actress is black. And they can hear all the executives going, yeah, but how would it be Snow White then if the actress is actually black? And by the way, I could care less if the actress is black, but it is a funny dilemma that Disney has that they've created themselves, which is you have a title called Snow White. You can't have Snow White be black. Or you could, but you might have to change the title, in which case you've completely gotten rid of and ruined the brand of Snow White. And so they decided that it wasn't also politically correct or proper to have the seven dwarfs be dwarfs. And so they have 6 grown adults.
Don't redo the movie.
Right. So why redo the movie, right? And the pictures are quite hysterically funny, okay? Because you're looking at Snow White, and Snow White over the decades, since the original is becoming increasingly brown and not white, and the dwarfs are becoming taller. So come on, this is funny stuff. The original Snow White story was written by the Brothers Grimm. According to reports, the movie written by Greta Gerwig will not feature a prince. So there we go. But will rather focus on Snow White's personal leadership ambitions. So in other words, Snow White is an angry female without a man. I mean, literally, that's what they're doing here. And she's not white. So Disney is teaching your children that, you know, Snow White is really ambitious personally and has great leadership capabilities. But there's no man involved. No, we can't have that. Because in the new Disney movies, relationships cannot be between a woman and man. Oh, no, 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 no. That's not allowed. Of course not. And the only thing that I'm surprised about is Disney hasn't decided to put in a trans dwarf, right? It's like, but I guess they made up for it. They've got some black dwarfs and some white. And by the way, if you're a dwarf, wouldn't you want to work, right? You're going to get paid to work. That's a good thing. So they're taking work. Disney is taking work away from people who are dwarfs who would otherwise be acting in movies in large part because of their height. They're being chosen because of their height. And they know that they're being chosen and they're okay with it because it's part of what they are and who they are. It defines them largely, not entirely, but certainly largely. And they know that. So it's like, fine, pay me. Pay me for it. I know I'm unique. Pay me. But Disney's like, oh no, we can't do that. So addressing rumors of political correctness, altering the story, Ziegler noted that making the changes were necessary to correct the racist past. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you wanted to correct the racist past, you, right? Chris just said, our producer, what's racist about Snow White? Right? There's really nothing racist about Snow White. Okay, the original Snow White. But if Disney wanted to be truly politically correct and addressed so-called past racism, they would have Snow Black. I mean, they would, right? But they can't because they will ruin their brand of Snow White, which is a brand that's been around for many, 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 many decades, like the very beginning of Disney. And that's what makes this so stupid and so funny simultaneously. So people are making these jokes about our being the PC Snow White. Yeah, it is because it needed that, Ziegler said. Further, she claimed that Snow White will be more compelling as she pursues a career rather than the protection of a handsome prince. So, I'm sorry. Beautiful women who run around with fully grown men, a couple of whom are dwarfs, but the rest of them are tall. She's not having a relationship with any of them, personal relationship or love. But at the same time, she can't have a handsome prince either. So if Disney wanted to go full work, what they should have done is had Snow White. I guess that was Shrek then. Yeah, Shrek actually did the princess that was really ugly. And then Shrek that was really ugly and all that stuff. So that's already been done. And of course, that was a spoof on Disney's various movies. Quote, our version is a refreshing story about a young woman who has a function beyond someday my prince will come. Ladies and gentlemen, parents of all ages, millennials of all ages, when you have children, or if you have children, yes, you do want your children to be happy. Yes, you do. You want your daughters to be successful in the workforce, and you want them to be highly functional. But you know what? It's also okay that they fall in love with a handsome prince. It's perfectly fine. In fact, it's also normal. The feminist film is expected to be released in March of 2024. But of course, Disney doesn't want normal because with Disney, there is no normal. And since there's no normal, they're doing everything they can to confuse your children. And that is what makes Disney a garbage company. It's a completely garbage company at this particular point in time. Could it be salvaged? It could be. But because these types of movies, this movie was just released. They keep coming out. Excuse me, I'm wrong. The movie is expected to be released in March of 2024. So the movie hasn't been released yet, what this shows you is Disney's learned nothing. They're still producing these movies to influence the way you think about families. Not the way a family's color is, not the color of the family, but whether or not women should be mothers and have children and fall in love. Somehow that is shunned in the movie. Meanwhile, Don Serber reported on his Substack that Disney is in the midst of an unprecedented freefall. Its stock price, for example, has declined over $100 per share in a matter of a few years. in the midst of the parent company's financial struggles. One of its branches, ESPN, continued to falter. Yeah, that's to say the least. ESPN had a complete bloodbath there last month when they just laid off tons of highly paid people, by the way. Not just, the medium paid people, but highly paid people, because ESPN got into politics. ESPN, being, of course, the premier channel for sports, got involved in politics, and that doesn't belong in sports. And now Snow White is involved in politics, like all things Disney. And it makes you wonder, it's like, so are you really an entertainment company? No, you're not. No, you're not. You're not an entertainment company. You're a company that is literally, I personally believe, doing the bidding of China, communist China. And that is to completely destroy the American culture from within. Because I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, do you think the Disney theme parks in China are talking about LGBTQ plus minus, et cetera stuff at their parks? No way. No way. Between Disney's faltering streaming service, Disney Plus, its LGBTQ-friendly theme parks, and its far-left propaganda films, the former industry giant appears to be in dire straits. The cherry on the top, however, is that the woke Disney heiress, Abigail Disney, and Abigail Disney being, I think, the granddaughter of the founder of Disney World, of the founder of the Walt Disney Company. I think she's the granddaughter of Walt Disney. Recently, Abigail was arrested at a climate change activist rally wherein the activists blocked the entryway to the East Hampton airport. Why? Because in East Hampton, which is on the eastern part of Long Island, it's an airport. And by the way, you can fly into East Hampton Airport. Anyone can if you really want to. It's an airport that many wealthy people use because they have very large estates in eastern Long Island. And so it's kind of funny that Abigail Disney, the granddaughter of Walt Disney, the founder of Disney World, became a climate change activist. This just happened, by the way, and was arrested at this airport because she's protesting rich people using private planes. One of the richest people, of course, that you don't know about, Abigail Disney. So there you have Disney, of course, ladies and gentlemen, doubling down on stupid and engaging in the no dwarfs zone. And Snow White is now diverse. It's now Snow Hispanic, but they didn't go all the way. It should have been Snow Black if they really wanted to pay for past sins, if they really had them, which I don't know if they did or they didn't, but it's just self-flagellation. It's stupid. So next up, podcast listeners, we have some incredible news and a story called Stop Hiring White Dudes. And I just want to make this clear, ladies and gentlemen. I don't care. And I know by this point in time, if you've never heard this podcast before, you're probably saying, oh my God, what a white supremacist. He's talking about race. I don't care who you put in your movies. Okay? I don't care. I go to a movie based on being entertained, right? Or if I want to go get a job somewhere, it's based on whether I like that kind of work, not necessarily who I'm going to be working with. And so it's the left that keeps pushing these narratives of the movies, but also of the self-flagellation, like you can't hire anyone other than people that are not white. It's just really dangerous, and it is in itself discrimination, and it is wrong. Former commander of U.S. Air Force Civil Air Patrol said, quote, stop hiring middle-aged white people. So the former commander of the Civil Air Patrol, the United States Air Force Auxiliary, okay, he's the commander. The guy in charge has suggested that Civil Air Patrol officials should just overlook white male applicants, male pilots with age and or experience instead, and embrace instead diversity and being inclusive into their hiring practice. So in other words, don't hire the person who is the best pilot. Hire the person based on the way they look. And ladies and gentlemen, when you get on a plane, and I know we've said this before in Mark and the Millennials, and I said this to someone the other day in the Maryland House of Delegates. When you get on a plane, do you care about the color of the pilot, or or the sex of the pilot, or the sexual preference of the pilot, or do you care about whether the pilot is a great pilot and truly qualified? I'm pretty sure you care that the pilot is highly qualified and a fantastic pilot. Okay, makes sense to me. But in the United States of America, and in particular in the military and in the media and in the entertainment space, as you just heard with Disney, you have individuals who have been engaged in DEI training, and it's really retraining. It's like training camps in China where they are brainwashed into thinking that hiring the most experienced and best and skilled person in a specific field is a bad thing. Instead, the qualification that matters most is the way they look. The same thing applies to doctors. If you've ever been under the knife, that is to say, you've ever been in an emergency room, and you know that you're minutes away from being put under with anesthesia and you're going to be operated on by a surgeon, do you care what the surgeon looks like? No, you don't. You care about whether or not that surgeon is the most qualified surgeon on the planet. And this is the way things have always worked until, of course, the left got in charge. So former commander of the Civil Air Patrol, the U.S. Air Force Auxiliary, has suggested that Civil Air Patrol officials should not hire people who are white. In a video that has since gone viral on social media, Colonel Mark Wooten, who commanded the Civil Air Patrol, United States Air Force from 2019 until April of 2022, apparently received a request for suggestions or guidance. So the Air Force asked him, hey, as the former commander, give us some suggestions and guidance on what we should do and how we should hire people. Because, we think this is important. And so we have a clip from this, ladies and gentlemen. You won't believe it. And here it is.
And, the only really guidance I put out there for them to consider is stop hiring middle-aged white people, especially dudes that are pilots, because honestly, we all think alike too much. And if we're going to be preaching diversity and being inclusive, and for crying out loud, let's back it up with let's make the rhetoric meet the reality.
That's how incredibly clever this guy's language is. We all think alike. That is not true, ladies and gentlemen. People don't think alike based on the way they look. Okay? They just look alike. That's it. And so this gentleman is a complete and utter liar, and he's a complete and utter tool for the CCP as far as I'm concerned, because who else would say that you should hire people based on the way they look, not based on their qualifications to actually fly and succeed at flying a plane at a high level, like in combat, for example? Well, this guy, of course. And then we have CNN. The host abruptly ends a segment on CNN when a guest whips out the facts about affirmative action's impact on Asian students. So see, this is what's interesting. The discrimination that's happening on the left is not just discrimination of what you would think, right? Based on DEI, which is discrimination based on whether or not you're Caucasian or whether or not you are successful financially. No. The discrimination that's coming from the left is about anyone who's having success in society whatsoever, which is what a communist country would do. Let's push down all those people who are successful because we ought not in any way, shape, or form reward merit. No, it's the opposite. We shouldn't reward merit. We should discourage it. That's exactly what the CCP wants. CNN host Abby Phillip ended the segment with a fair admissions advocate on Thursday when he used facts to demonstrate the downside of affirmative action. Kenny Zhu, a board member for Students for Fair Admissions, the plaintiff in the Supreme Court case, told Phillip that academic excellence, not race, should prioritize in college admissions. Quote, I think admissions should be only based on merit. Why are we asking a university to calculate somebody's level of diversity? I think that sets a very bad precedent for anyone trying to get into college. We should be treated on the basis of our merits. We should be treated on the basis of how hard we work, how we study, our SAT scores, our grades. But Phillip pushed back. Phillip being the CNN host. She asked why admissions boards should not consider other factors that students bring to the table, like socioeconomic background. Zhu argued you cannot do that fairly because inevitably admission standards are changed for applicants from a disadvantaged socioeconomic background versus applicants from a privileged background. Quote, we don't want that. We want Black students to succeed. We want every student to succeed. Low-income students to succeed, he pointed out. But you have to put them in scenarios in places where they are likely to succeed. And lowering your standard to admit somebody of a socioeconomic status or race would not help you do that. In fact, you would harm their graduation rate and excellence. Phillip responded that standards aren't lowered, but Zhu held the ground despite Phillip's attempts to interrupt him. The standards are lowered as admissions data shows. Asians have to score 273 points higher, ladies and gentlemen, on an SAT to have the same chance of admissions as someone who is Black, he argued. So the standard is lowered for Black Americans. So, ladies and gentlemen, here's the thing. By the way, abruptly after those facts, the CNN host cut the segment short because she was told in her earpiece by the CNN producers, we can't talk about this anymore. He's making too much sense for our viewers. We must keep our viewers as ignorant as possible. And so the real reason I'm reading this segment is because it is interconnected with the no dwarf zone at Disney, getting rid of Snow White, because now it's Snow Hispanic, but they sure as heck don't want Snow Black. Why? Because it's Disney, right? It'll ruin their brand, not because the person is Black, by the way, but because Disney would have to rechange the name, and that would ruin the brand that they've spent so many years building, and Disney ultimately cares about their stock price, I guess. And then you have this gentleman who is an Asian advocate on CNN basically saying, look, merit matters. And so all this goes around the same thing. We've talked about this before, namely school choice. If you have school choice in America's inner cities to help individuals who are Black get out of the really failed schools, then they're going to easily do well in these private schools, especially private boarding schools, so they can get up and out of their communities where there's rampant crime and prostitution and drugs, and they can be put into environments where they actually have an opportunity for success. In fact, they would have an opportunity for success far greater than almost anyone else. I think I'm all for that. Okay? Give them that opportunity. But the left doesn't want them to succeed through merit. They want to continue to play this race war, which is so dangerous. And the thing is you can be such a principled person in America by wanting to help those who need the help. They need a hand up. They need a leg up. And I'm definitely one of those persons, but not by getting rid of merit, ladies and gentlemen. That's what the CCP wants. Because then you no longer have the rule of law. You no longer have rules at all. It's then, at that point, only based on any kind of advancement in the United States. It's based on the way you look, or the way you think, or who you know. Not based on what you know. And so next up, podcast listeners, we just talked about, of course, this incredible story of the wonderful woke world of Disney, No Dwarfs Allowed. And then stop hiring white dudes from the United States Air Force. And then CNN, no, we don't want any more Asians in America's schools. This is CNN, right? Just disgusting. Well, we also have this incredible story of Mike Pence. This is an important story, okay? Because Mike Pence, former vice president of the United States, who's now running for president of the United States, good old Mike Pence decided to put himself in front of Tucker Carlson for an interview. And the interview was quite interesting because, as you all know out there in podcast land, Tucker Carlson, who left Fox News and is developing his own brand, kind of already was his own brand, but now developing it in his own account. Tucker Carlson is asking critical questions of all the presidential candidates, and I'm really happy that's happening, ladies and gentlemen. It's so important because I'm pretty sure no other interviewer who is, let's say, semi-friendly to Republican candidates are willing to ask the tough questions. And I really want an interviewer to ask the tough questions of all candidates, including Trump, including DeSantis, the two top candidates, clearly, but all the candidates. So we can finally separate those who are the complete tools. And Tucker Carlson, as you know, does not support the war in Ukraine. He wants us to think more critically about American engagement abroad and America's money going abroad, particularly when the United States has so many issues, civil issues, as well as legal issues. We have criminal issues. I mean, look, so many societal issues, I guess is a better way of putting it. So Carlson just mopped the floor with Pence. And Pence had an opportunity to respond, of course, just like all candidates do when they're interviewed by Carlson. Look, you can call Carlson out if you disagree with him. If you disagree with Tucker Carlson, just like any person who's interviewing you, and the person that's interviewing, like Tucker Carlson, says, I think that the engagement of the United States in the Ukraine is a big mistake, yada, yada, yada. Let's just say that's what you're asked. And you believe, contrary to that, that is to say, you believe that we should be fully engaged in the Ukraine against Russia. If that's what you believe, then defend what you believe. But Pence didn't even bother doing that. And we have a clip on this, ladies and gentlemen. It's about a minute long. It's worth listening to. Here it is. You won't believe it. Here it is.
You are distressed that the Ukrainians don't have enough American tanks. Every city in the United States has become much worse over the past 3 years. Yeah. Drive around. There's not one city that's gotten better in the United States. And it's visible. Our economy has degraded. The suicide rate has jumped. Public filth and disorder and crime have exponentially increased. And yet your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. I think it's a fair question to ask, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern. I'm running for president of the United States because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. I think Joe Biden has weakened America at home and abroad. And as president of the United States, we're going to restore law and order in our cities. We're going to secure our border. We're going to get this economy moving again. And we're going to make sure that we have men and women on our courts at every level that will stand for the right to life and defend all the God-given liberties enshrined in our Constitution. Anybody that says that we can't be the leader of the free world and solve our problems at home has a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth. We can do both.
So Mike Pence, okay, it was at the end, he came back a little bit and tried to provide an answer. But his answer was, yeah, we can do both. We can solve our problems at home. And at the same time, we can have a full out war with Russia via the Ukraine. And of course, the Ukraine being the U.S. client state. And at the same time, have a Cold War with China. Literally, that's what he's saying. And this is the part of the folks that are the neocons in the conservative movement who are all about getting involved with and being in bed with the deep state to go to war. It's like the endless war, just like in the novel 1984 by George Orwell, right? There were always endless wars to distract you from how awful things were at home. The endless wars. That keeps you refocused away from societal problems in your own country. And of course, Pence is like, well, we can solve both and so forth, but it's also not my concern, all the stuff that's happening back home. And there's also, I'm not sure if you knew this because you can't see it if you're listening to the podcast, in the video when Tucker Carlson asks Pence the questions, that particular question, Pence is just looking away like he's pissed that he's even being questioned in any way, shape, or form by anyone about his opinion on this. And Pence just looks away and then looks at the audience. He's got like an attitude. And it's really kind of fascinating because he comes off as like a complete idiot and kind of like a douche when you watch him. He really does. And the thing is, as a conservative, I want people in the conservative movement to explain to me why the Ukraine is so important to, I know why it's important to NATO, okay? But why is it so important in the overall scheme of things with the United States of America? Like, what led up to this war? Who caused this war? Why did Russia invade? Why was there a perception of weakness when Biden got in by Russia of America's support of the Ukraine? And then, not to mention the Biden family's involvement in the Ukraine. I mean, there's a lot there. Okay? And I feel like at least Tucker Carlson's asking the questions, which is, I believe personally, one of the reasons why he was fired. Because I do believe that the deep state doesn't want those questions to be asked. Like, what was the United States doing in the Ukraine very early on? And to what extent, and by the way, trust us, tell us. If there were labs in the Ukraine, remember that? Well, who controlled the labs? Who started the labs? What were the purpose of the labs? What were the Russians really doing? Tell us. Why is it that you, the deep state, think that we're not capable of handling the truth? It's like, you can't handle the truth. We can't tell you what's going on. Oh, no. And so I just thought that was worth listening to because Pence's response was, well, it's not my concern about what's happening in America's cities and how bad our societal problems are. That's not my concern. My concern is what's happening overseas. Just incredible. I think in one fell swoop, he made himself, him being Pence, made himself unqualified and disqualified to be president of the United States. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is.
Dum 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 dum.
And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is misgendering hate speech. Misgendering is hate speech. Yes, you heard that correctly. Michigan Democrats just passed a bill, ladies and gentlemen, that would criminalize misgendering. And they're calling it hate speech. Michigan Democrats passed a bill this week that would criminalize misgendering and other forms of hate speech. The House of Representatives in Michigan passed House Bill 4474, which updates the state's hate crime laws to include certain kinds of offensive speech. According to legal experts, such offensive speech would include not using someone's preferred pronouns. Since the bill designates sexual orientation and gender identity or expression as a protected class. Speech considered offensive under the law would be guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment for not more than 5 years or by a fine of not more than $10,000. Quote, intimidate means a willful course of conduct involving repeated or continuing harassment of another individual that would cause a reasonable individual to feel terrorized, frightened, or threatened, and that actually causes the victim to feel terrorized, frightened, or threatened, the bill reads. The bill defines gender identity and expression as having, quote, or being perceived as having a gender-related self-identity or expression, whether or not associated with an individual's assigned sex at birth. So you heard that correctly, ladies and gentlemen. In Michigan, if you use someone's wrong pronoun, and presumably they say, no, you must refer to me as they or their, and you say, well, you, I'm going to call you you because that is easier for me because you is not plural and you're just one person. You then would be considered engaging in a hate crime in the state of Michigan and could serve up to 5 years and be fined. But you wouldn't be fined more than $10,000. Imagine how stupid this is. Republican State Representative Angela Rigas of Michigan blasted the bill as a continued weaponization of the system against conservatives. I guess what she's trying to say there is conservatives don't want to use your preferred pronouns, especially when those preferred pronouns don't match your gender or don't match common sense, like pronouns that are plural, like they or their. Quote, the state of Michigan is now explicitly allowing the gender delusion issue to be used as a protected class, she said in a statement. Quote, we saw similar concerns when they wanted to pass blocks on conversion therapy. It seems Dems want to be in the business of telling people how to think. State Representative Andrew Fink, another Republican, also objected to the bill in a floor speech. As it is written, the risk that disfavored opinions will become criminal under this legislation is too severe, he said. Unsurprisingly, State Representative Emily Divendorf, the first openly non-binary lawmaker in Michigan, celebrated the passage of the bill on Tuesday. She said, quote, today is just a mixture of incredible relief and also regret and the loss for those folks that we just did not make it happen in time for. This is the non-binary representative. So what do you call non-binary representative? What do you think their preferred pronoun would be, Chris?
Non-binary representative?
Yes. I mean,
who knows?
Yeah, it's like representative, let's say her, like, what do you call her? You know? I mean, what pronoun does she go by?
Not she.
Right. Because non-binary would not be he or she. So I guess that would be the they or their, and you know, their being THEIR, neither of which makes any sense at all. And of course, with this individual who's non-binary in Michigan, if you said anything other than they or their, then you would be in great trouble. In that you would be fined up to $10,000 or go to prison. So folks, if that weren't enough, right? And you wonder, do you wonder why Michigan passed this bill? Well, other than the fact that the Democrats took over Michigan only just a couple of years ago, they took over the legislature in Michigan. And now you see how crazy they govern after they take it over. But listen to this real quickly. Nearly half of millennials believe misgendering should be illegal. So almost half of all millennials in the United States, aged 25 to 34, agree that misgendering should be a crime, according to a poll conducted exclusively by Newsweek and for Newsweek that was published last week. The survey found 44% of individuals aged 25 to 34 believe, quote, referring to someone by the wrong gender pronoun, he, him, she, her, should be a criminal offense, while 31% of them disagree, according to Newsweek. The remaining 25% neither agree nor disagree. I don't know, would be their response. The poll surveyed 1,500 eligible U.S. voters and conducted by Redfield and Wilson Strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to say this on this particular dumbest bill in America. This is why we have a Constitution of the United States that has free speech as the First Amendment to it, right? Because free speech doesn't mean speech that you like. It just means I get to say what I want. And the First Amendment also protects common sense as it relates to speech. When you have a party that is so mentally ill that is bought into the idea that people can be more than one person from the perspective of pronouns. It's just ridiculous. But it's also kind of funny at the same time because I believe it's all going to come around, and I'm hoping that millennials get on board too, even though about half of them think this is okay. You know when it's not okay is when the millennials decide, when they start themselves going to prison or get fined or get caught up in the court system and have to take this stupid charge to the Supreme Court of the United States, who then would say, yeah, it's not a hate crime. It's not a hate crime. They're just words, okay? You may not like the words, but they're just words. And that is the dumbest bill in America. Misgendering is hate speech in the state of Michigan. And that's it from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, True Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.